The function does not receive, it won't receive any argument, and even it is not sending any return value back to the function. The function is calling itself again and again, then that process is termed as what? Recursion. Default values can be assigned to the argument which does not have a matching arguments in the function call. Hello everybody, welcome back to the session 3 on chapter 13, that is user-defined functions. I am Rohini DS from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. In the previous session of this chapter, I have discussed regarding these many topics. That is what we have learned regarding the calling a function. So already we got to know that we have a calling function and called function. So when this calling function we are using, this will going to make the active or it will going to invoke another function to get work. That function will going to be called as called function. That means the calling function will going to, the control will be transferred from calling function to called function. So in the called function, the operation will going to take place and it will going to return a value back to the calling function. Then calling function will going to display the resultant to the user. That is what calling function. And we have learned regarding the main function where the actual execution of a program will going to get started with this main function. If it is returning 0, then the program is executed successfully. If it is returning any non-zero values, then there will be an error. Then returning a value, after the calculation, it has to return some value back to the main function or a calling function. That is what? Returning a value. And also I have discussed regarding this function prototype. That is what we are going to use the return type specifier, function name and list of an argument. At last we are going to put semicolon that indicates what type of function we are using, what is its return type, what is the name of a function and what kind of and what number of arguments that we are sending to our function is nothing but what? Function prototype. And also I have discussed regarding the types of arguments. How many arguments types we have? We have two types. One is actual and another one is formal parameters or formal arguments. So this is also called as dummy arguments because it will going to get the values from this actual arguments or actual parameters. Then we have discussed regarding the types of variables. There are two types. One is local variable and another one is global variable. And also I have discussed regarding what do you mean by scope of a variable. So in our today's session, we are going to learn regarding the types of user-defined function. We already know about the types of function, library function and user-defined function. Again, user-defined function is classified into several types. That is what I will be discussing in my today class. And we are going to learn about this passing a default arguments to the function. What if I wanted to have a default value for my parameters or arguments? And I will be discussing regarding this uses of default values. That is, what are the advantages or benefits of having this default values in our program. And I will be discussing regarding the passing constant arguments. So this will be the content of my today's session. So now we'll see about this types of user-defined functions. So when it comes to the types of user-defined functions, so don't get confused and you just need to remember only two things. What is that? You have to remember argument, you have to remember return value. So already we know about the user-defined function, right? So already I have discussed regarding its definition or a structure of a user-defined function. What is the first point that you are supposed to remember? Its return type. Second is function name. And we have to remember argument list along with a declaration of that arguments are a parameter. So fourth is nothing but opening and closing of a flat braces. So fifth is what? That is body of a function. It comprises of a local variable as well as the executable statement. At last we have a return of expression. So now you need to concentrate on the point 3 and 6. That is what you have to concentrate regarding the arguments as well as the return type. If a function is having arguments, is it returning some value back to the function? And we have to think like, is it containing a return value or it does not contain a return value? So it is having a arguments are a parameter or it does not contain a parameter. That and all we have to remember. Okay, so we will be having combination here, whether it is having argument or not. So whether it is returning a value back to the function or not. So in that combination, you have to remember. Okay. So there are different types of user-defined functions we have. What is the first type? Function with no arguments. The function with no arguments and no return value. The function does not contain argument as well as it won't return any value back to the main function. And function with argument and function with no return values. So here I am going to send some arguments, but it does not return anything back to the function. Next, function with no arguments and with return values. So remember all these things. Function with no arguments. No argument is there, and with return value. So we are not giving any arguments, but it will going to return some value back to the function. And here, function with arguments and function with return values. Function with arguments and function with return values. Okay. So I will just make you understand by taking a real-time example. Okay. You just wanted to share the snacks with your friend. Okay. So consider yourself as a friend and you wanted to share the snacks with your friend. Okay. So what is the first one? Function with no arguments and no return value. You don't wanted to share your snacks with your friend, and even your friend does not wanted to return some snacks back to you. Okay. So again, so function with arguments and with no return value. You are willing to give the snacks to your friend, but your friend does not wanted to return that snacks back to you. That is what the second kind. Next, function with no arguments and with return value. You don't wanted to give the snacks to your friend, but your friend is willing to distribute his snacks to you. Okay, that is third point. Next, function with arguments and with return value. That is what sharing is caring. So you are going to share your snacks with your friend. In return, your friend is also going to send you. Okay. So what we have at last, that is recursive function. You only having your snacks. That is what recursive function. I will be discussing about all these types of a function along with the syntax and example. Then that will be easy for you. We'll see now. What is the first type? Function with no argument and no return value. So here it does not contain any argument and it won't return any value back to the function. So you can see that in this method they simply perform the independent task because it is not appealing anything and it won't return anything back to the function. That is what it is, just simply performing its task, and the function does not receive or send any argument. You are not giving any snacks or you are not taking any snacks from your friends or giving to your friends. That is what here. The function does not receive, it won't receive any argument, and even it is not sending any return value back to the function. Okay. So remember the general syntax. So before that, I wanted to tell you how we are going to write a user-defined function. What is the first step you have to remember? So it will going to take the return type specifier. Is it? So it will going to take return types specifier. Then we have to specify the function name. I need to specify function name. Third point is what? List of argument with declaration. Let me consider that as a argument list. Then opening and closing of a flat braces. So here it will going to have several set of statements and it will contain a return of expression. This is how we are going to define the structure. Okay. So in this first type of the function, user-defined function, what it contains, it has a no arguments and it does not return any value back to the function. So here you can see that when I will be using this void, when I don't want it to return any value back, then we are going to use this void. So void will going to avoid the return values. That is what when I don't want it to return any value, then I have to use void. When I want it to return some value back to the function, then I have to use int data type or a float or any char data type. Okay. So here void is a return type. When I am using a void, you have to understand that it won't return anything. Okay. Next we have a function name. And within the parenthesis, I need to specify the list of arguments. But here, argument list is what? Empty. Argument list is empty. So that I can say that it is not receiving any arguments. So I then, opening of flat braces I have a several set of statements, but I don't have a return of expression. So you can see that we don't have this part in this syntax. That is what it won't return any value back to the function. Then I will be closing this function scope or this block will going to ends. Okay, so that is what. So when I'm using this void, it won't receive or it won't take any of the return values. It will be avoided. Then here we are not sending any arguments. So these two things you have to remember. So you can see the example. Void is a return type and I'm using this natural function. Function name is natural and I have loop called for loop and we are initializing I is equal to 1, I less than or equal to 10. If it is true, then it will going to return the value of I, then I will be incremented by 1. So it won't return any value, but whatever is there in the I, that will be displayed on the screen. So that is what, it is not returning any value and here also it is not taking any arguments. So this is regarding function with no arguments and with no return value. What is the next type? Function with arguments and with no return value. So here we have arguments. By taking arguments, it is not sending any return value back to the function. So in this method, the function receives what it is receiving. It is receiving some arguments. It will going to take some parameters or argument into the function and does not return any value back to the calling function. That is what the function has a values or a variables called arguments and it does not return any values back to the main function. So you can see that when there is no return type, without worrying anything, you have to write void as a return type because it does not return any value back to the function, so that we can use this void. After that, same as the previous one, I have a name of a function in order to identify, that is what function name. And remember one thing, here I have a list of arguments. I am sending some argument, but it does not return me the return values. Okay, so void is a data type or a return type specifier. When we have to use void? When there is no return value. So here void function name and I have a argument list. Along with that, it will going to have several executable statements. But do we have this return of expression here? No. That means there is no return values. So after that, we will be closing this. Opening and closing of flower braces will indicate the block of this function. So we'll see the example. Void sum. What is the name of a function? Sum. And I have three parameters x, y, z. All are of the data type integer. What I can call all these together? That is what? Arguments. It will taking the list of arguments or a parameter, but by taking that arguments and all, it will going to perform some of the operation, but it does not return any value back to the main function. That is what you have to remember. I have a local variable called sum and executable statements are what? Sum is equal to x plus y plus z. I am adding all these three values. Then by making use of this COUT statement, I am just printing the value of a sum. Okay. Then we are going to close the function scope. Does it returning anything? No. But it has a argument or a parameter. This type of user-defined function is termed as function with arguments and with no return values. So what is the next type? Function with no argument and with return value. You are not giving a snacks to your friend, but your friend wanted to give some snacks back to you. That is what you have to understand here. Function with no arguments and with return values. So in this method, the function receives no argument. I am not going to take any values, but it will going to return a value. But it will going to return some value back to the main function. So what is the first thing? Return type specifier. So here it returning some value. Then I have to use which kind of data type? Can I use void here? No, because it is returning some value. If it is returning some value, instead of void, I have to take int. So that I am just specifying return type. If it is not taking or if it is not sending back as a return value, at that time we can take the data type or a return type as a void. But here it is having a return value. So I should not use void as a return type specifier. Next, I have a function name. But does it contain any arguments? Here it indicates that no argument. So that this parenthesis will be free from the list of arguments. It is not taking any arguments here. And we have what? opening and closing of flower braces. Within that, I have a several executable statement, and we found that we have a return of value. That is what it is wanted to return some value. It is not taking any arguments, but it is returning some value back to the function. Then this ends the scope of this function. We'll see the example here. Int is a return type specifier. Why I am taking int? Because it wanted to return some value back to the function. If I am using void, it won't take any value, or it won't return any value back to the main function. But here I wanted to return some value. That's why I have to take int as a data type. So int, what is the function name? Greatest. Function name is greatest. But is it taking any argument list here? No. So that means it is not taking any arguments or a parameter. Then, and already we have discussed regarding a return a value. I can have any number of return value, but at a time it will going to return only one value back to the main function. That is based on the condition. So that is what you have to remember here. So if you see this example, I have two return values, but how many return value will going to be sent back to the calling function? Only one. Okay. So it can have any number of return value, but based on the condition, it is capable or able to send only one return value back to the function. So that int greatest is a function name. Within that, I have a condition. What is that? If A is greater than B. Already we have discussed regarding how if-else statement will gonna work, right? So I have if-else statement. So if this condition is true, then if part will going to take place. If not, that it will comes to else part, then it will going to return the value of B. For example, if I am taking A is equal to 10 and B is equal to 20. So at that time, I will check out if A is greater than B. So what it will become? 10 is greater than 20. Either true is false, it will become false. 10 is not greater than 20. At that time, else part will going to execute. That is what? Return of B. Then it will going to return the value called B as a greatest value. But it is not taking any argument, but it is returning some value back to the function. That is what? The function with no arguments and with return values. So we'll see the last type of user-defined function, that is function with arguments and with return values. So you are going to share your snacks with your friend. In return, your friend is also sharing their snacks with you. That is what it is, having both argument as well as the return values. Okay. Can I use this return type specifier as a void here? Obviously not. Why? Because it will going to return some value back to the function. That is what the reason we are not supposed to use when we are having this type of user-defined function. In this method, the function receives some arguments. It will take some arguments and returns a value. So we'll see the general form, return type specifier, and I have a name for a function. Then it has a list of arguments or a parameter. It contains several arguments or a parameter. So within the block of code, I have several set of executable statements. Along with that, we have a return of value. So it contains both argument list as well as the return values. So at last, we are going to close the scope. So no need to worry anything. Just remember return type specifier and argument list, and does it contain any arguments or parameter. Before that, you have to specify a name of a function, and it may comprises of any number of statements. Does it contain return value or not? If not, no need to write this line. If it is having some return value, then we have to specify. Then see the example here. We are finding a simple interest. So I am taking a return type specifier as a float. Can I take it as a int? Yes. But here I will be dealing with some of the floating point values, like it will going to have both the whole number as well as the fractional part. That is what the reason I am having this return type specifier as a float. And what is the name of a function? That is interest. And how many arguments we are sending? I am sending 3 arguments, that is P, T and R. All are of the data type float. And every value or a variable or argument needs to be separated by comma. Then what is the variable I am taking? So here I am taking a variable called SI, which is of the data type float. Okay. Why I am taking this SI variable? In order to store the content of the simple interest. That means what is the formula in order to find a simple interest? P into T into R over 100. So whatever the value that we have for P, T, R will going to be multiplied and will be divided by 100. That value will going to be stored in this SI. But I wanted to return the content or a resultant back to the calling function. Then instead of displaying this with the help of CR, I'm just sending this value back to the calling function. That is what it is having return of SI. So it has both list of arguments and it contains the return value. That type of user-defined function will be termed as function with arguments and with return values. I hope you all understood all these four types. So we'll see the last type, that is recursive function. So when you don't wanted to share your snacks with anybody, you just wanted to enjoy your snacks. That is what you are having your snacks again and again. That is what I can call recursive function. So why I am saying this? You can see the definition. Recursive function is a function that call itself. The function that call itself. So when you are calling your name again and again, that is what? You are calling yourself again. But here, when I will get to know when I need to supposed to stop this recursive function, that is what, there must be some statements or there must be some condition. When that condition gets satisfied, then this recursive function will going to come out of the loop. Otherwise, this recursive function will be work as what? Infinite loop. There must be some statements. If this statement will going to be met or the statement is getting satisfied, then only it will going to stop calling the function again and again. Okay, that is what you have to remember. Then what I will call this function as? So if a function is calling itself again and again, then that process is termed as what? Recursion. The process of calling a function by itself is called as recursion. So the function is recursive function and the process is called as recursion. Okay. So remember these 2 points. Recursive function is a function that call itself. What is the calling of function again and again by itself? Then I can call that process as a recursion. We'll see the general syntax here. So this recursive function will going to call itself again and again. So here I have a return type specifier. It is same like what user defined function itself. Okay. So return type and I have a function name. Along with that I have a list of arguments. Okay. Then it will enter into the loop. Then I have several executable statements. After that, I have a return value, return statement. So that means it is belongs to a category called a function with argument list and with return value. But in return, what it is sending? It is not sending a value. Instead of that, it is calling that function again and again. So that you can see here, return of again this will going to takes place. That means it will going to have a function name and list of arguments again. So let me take an example. Let me consider int sum of int a comma int b. This is what? Int is a return type and name of a function is sum. And how many arguments list I have? I have 2 arguments, that is a and b. And I wanted to have one more variable called int c. So before that I need to open the scope of a function. Then int c. Then how I am going to find the c? C is equal to a plus b. This is what local variable declaration and this is executable statement. So in the return function, instead of sending the c value, I am just calling this function again. Then how I am going to write that? Return of, what is the function name? That is sum and what it includes? So it has 2 variables called int a comma int b. This is how this function will going to work, that is recursive function. So when some condition gets satisfied, then this looping will going to end. That kind of function or a process will be termed as what? Recursion. Important question. What is recursion function? Explain with a example. Okay. So this is regarding what? Types of user defined function. Without arguments and without no return value. So and with arguments and with return values, and at last we have a recursive functions or a recursion. Okay. So we'll see the next topic, that is passing default arguments to function. What is this? Passing default arguments to function. Here, if you consider a function, there I have a list of arguments. That means the variables what are all I require for my processing, that I can term that as a arguments or a parameter. But here I don't want it to give the dynamic value for those arguments. I want the value of that arguments to be 10 always or 20 always. That means what? I can make it default. That kind of arguments can also be sent to the function. How we are going to do that? We'll see now. Here in the C++, to call a function, we need not to pass all the values for the arguments to a function from the calling function. So when I'm using calling function and call function, when I'm having the calling function, there we are going to specify the values or arguments that I wanted to send from calling function to call function. But in C++, no need to send all the values to the from the calling function to call function. So instead of that, I can have some default value in the call function. So that what? This passing default arguments to the function. So here it will going to allow us to assign default values to the formal arguments, where we will be having these formal arguments, that is in the function definition, not in the function declaration or a calling function. We will be having this dummy arguments or a formal arguments or a parameter in the function definition. Then default values can be assigned to the argument which does not have a matching arguments in the function call. I will explain you with an example. Let me consider int sum of int a comma int b. Okay. So these are the two arguments. We are going to have some of statement. This is function definition. And how can I call this function? That is what? Sum of 10 comma 20. So what it indicates? So let me consider C is equal to sum of 10 comma 20. So the 10 value will going to be stored in A and 20 will going to be stored in B. After that, by taking these two values, by this formal parameter or a formal arguments will be used for the calculation, and that value will going to be stored. Here, when I am using this default argument, instead of giving the value of 20 to the B, I am just wanted to make it default. So instead of sending this value of B as a 20, I am just going to assign this as a 15. Who is going to change the value of a variable? Only compiler will going to change. But I don't want it to change the value of this B throughout my program. I wanted it to be as 15 all the time. At the time, we are going to use this topic called passing default values to the function. So at the time here, no need to send the value from the calling function to called function. Why? Because it is already have some default value for the variable called B. At that time, I can send only one value, that is will going to be assigned for this A. Okay. So when you have missed some value, in order to send the value from calling function to the called function, at the time we can use this concept called default values. So here you can see that default values are assigned in the function prototype when I am declaring a function. So in the header itself, we have to give the value for default variables, or we have to give the values for default arguments. So here I should not assign B is equal to 20 in the calling function. If I wanted to give the default value for the any of the variable, that needs to be takes place only in the function prototype, that is in the header part itself. So the default values are assigned to the arguments as we initialize the variable. What is the syntax? I have to specify the data type and I need to specify the variable name, and by making use of an equal symbol, we are going to specify the value. The value will going to be stored in this particular variable. So here you can see the example. Float is a return type specifier, and what is the function name? I have a interest, that is a name of a function. And how many arguments I have? I have 3 arguments, that is float amount, int time, and float rate is equal to 0.15. So what you are seeing here, that is what I am giving some default value to this rate variable. And remember one thing, the assign should be takes place from the right to left. If I wanted to give some default value for this time, first I have to give the default value for this rate. Then only I can give the default value for time. So it has to take place from right to left. So if I wanted to give the default value for amount, it has to be appear at the right end, or I have to give the default value for rate as well as the time, then only I can able to assign the default value for amount. Okay, so here what it will going to perform? Float, interest is the name of a function, 3 variables, amount, time, and rate is 0.15. So here how we are going to do that in a function call? I don't want it to send 3 values here. Instead of that, I need to send only 2. Why? Because already we have assigned a value for rate. So that here I am going to send the amount as 10,000.25 because I am taking float, and I am going to take the time as 2 years. Okay. So at last in the function prototype, I am going to put semicolon. Here you can see that 10,000.25 is the value that will going to be assigned for this amount, and this 2 year will going to be assigned for time. Here I don't want it to send the value for rate because already it has been initialized the default value. Whatever the value that we have as a value, that will be copied to variable called rate. So here you can see that I am calling a function. How we are calling a function? SI is a function call, that is I am using SI as a variable, and I have a name of a function called interest, and here we are sending only 2 values, that is what, one is 5,000, another one is 5. That 5,000 will going to be assigned to amount, 5 will be assigned to time. Here you can see that third value arguments of that particular variable is missing because we have already defined, or we have made that as a default value. So whatever inside the compiler, it is not missing, the value already has been shared, or the value already has been defined. That is what default values. So if there is no default argument passage is taking place, then we have to specify the value for the rate. So that is how we are going to do that. SI is a variable and calling a function, that is interest, and I wanted to send 3 arguments. One is amount, another one is time, and if you have not analyzed or initialized the value for this rate, then I can send a value called 0.2, that is of a float data type. This is how we are going to use default arguments, or if I wanted to make any variable value as a default values, then we can do like this. Then what are the advantages or benefits of having this default arguments? So we'll see now, that is uses of default values. So default argument will be useful when in the situation where some arguments always have the same value. I want the year to be always 2. I don't want to give any other value in my program or in the function prototype. At that time, I can make that variable as a default variable. So I can give some default arguments, or I can assign some default value to that particular variable. So in that situation, this default values will be useful. What is the next point? Default arguments provides flexibility to the programmer. So if I am using this default arguments or a default value in my user defined function, then I no need to worry about passing of a value from calling function to call function, because the value for that variable is already declared and it has been initialized in the call function. Then no need to worry about the giving values or sending value from calling function to call function, because initialization will going to take place, or a default value will going to be takes place only in the call function. So in order to use that call function, or in order to make that active of that call function, I need to send value. But if it is having, that means the call function having default values, then no need to send any value from this calling function. Then it will be easy for the programmer. Then we are saying that this provides a flexibility to the programmer. Next, default arguments are used to add new arguments to the existing function. Already I have a function, but I have forgotten to send the value, that means I forgotten to send the values from calling function to call function. At that time, what I can do, I can take new variable in my call function and I can assign some default values. At that time, we should not, no need to bother about the sending of parameter or a value from the calling function to call function. At that time also, this default value will going to help us. That is, default arguments are used to add new arguments to the existing function. Again, next, default arguments are used to combine similar functions into one. So this will going to have more flexibility and I can combine similar functions into one. That means no need to worry about giving the different values or sending the different parameter. No need to worry because already everything has been initialized. No need to worry about any of the values or arguments, so that it will be easy in order to make a combine or a combination or concatenation of similar kinds of function into one function. These are the uses or advantages of having these default values. So we'll see the last thing, that is passing constant arguments. So till now I have discussed regarding we have a type of argument and how we are going to pass the default values, and here I can make any of the arguments or a parameter as a constant. Even compiler should not change the value that what I have made that as a constant. For example, I want the time is equal to 2, that means rate of interest and principal amount, and I have a time. I wanted to make the time as a constant. It should not get changed any time. So even compiler should not make a change of that particular time. So then I can make that arguments as a constant. How we are going to do that? That too with the help of a keyword called const. If I am making any of the variable as a const, then the compiler is not able to allocate or it is not able to modify the value of that particular variable or a argument. So in C++ we can declare some arguments as a constant. I can declare some variables or arguments as a constant, then compiler cannot modify the content or a arguments which is marked as a constant. So here you can see the example, int is a return type and string length is a function. That is what I can say that as a library function, because already we have discussed regarding this string length. What it will going to return? Number of character. So that here I am using a keyword called const. So that const, when I am using that as a const keyword, then whatever the parameter we have here, that value will going to be same all the time. Even the compiler will not able to modify the value of that particular variable. So whatever the value that we have in pointer variable called p, everything will going to be assigned as a constant value. And we can see one more example, int total, and I am making this x and y as a constant value. Whatever the value that I am going to give for x and y will going to be same throughout my program. So even compiler can't modify the value which I have been assigned to x and y. Why? Because we are making these two variables as a const. That is what the reason of having this constant arguments. So this kind of parameters can also be sent in our function. That is what user defined function. It's all about today's session. I hope you all understood with my today's class. So in the next class, we will be discussing about this pass by value or a call by value, and also I will be discussing regarding pass by reference or a call by reference, then passing arrays to function. So now I have passed default values, constant values, then how we are going to pass this arrays to function? Let me see in the next session, and passing structures to function. I hope you all understood and enjoyed this session. Let me meet you in the next session with the further topics of this chapter itself. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.